All right, recording. Cool. So first of all, mastering. Whee! Before we start talking about what mastering, all the details of mastering, can somebody tell me what you think mastering is? Let's have a little bit of a conversation. What do you think mastering is?
Isn't it like equalizing like levels across like an entire album, really?
Okay, so Joseph says equalizing across and doing levels across an entire album. Yes, that is definitely one mastering thing, one aspect of mastering. Absolutely. What else is mastering? So Jason says one of the last steps before an album is released. Yes. Megan says final mix. Yes. You guys are nailing it. What else?
Isn't it also like making sure that the way that it's stored is transferable to all the like most sorts of listening devices? It's like a mixing for that sort of a purpose.
Yeah, so creating mixes for different formats. Yeah, so this is great. You guys already know everything, so class is over. Yeah, no, this is really good. You guys have a lot of good feedback. Anything else that you think mastering is? What about, have you guys ever heard somebody in casual conversation be like, "Oh, I'm gonna master this track and then I'll like put it online"? What do you think they mean whenever they say that? Like, have you heard anybody talk that way? Just me? Okay. Nope. Yep. Okay. So responses. So it's the last step of the recording process. And yes, mastering is all of those things that you said. And in addition to that, it's there's a couple really literal, like technical things that mastering are. And first, mastering was done by engineers, like electrical engineers who built the equipment, who are just transferring data signal from one thing to another, like from tape to tape or tape to vinyl. So this didn't used to be an audio engineering thing. It used to be like an engineering thing. It's also post production, so checking for errors, adding markers, polishing tracks. And here's a basic rundown of the mastering process. You have files as it exists now. Like, so if you made a track and you were going to release it, how should you get it mastered? You have some digital files. You send it to a mastering engineer, or you are a mastering engineer that has physical analog equipment. You can even get it printed to analog tape. And then you have that tape sent through more equipment, analog and digital, and then printed in whatever format. So to be published online, vinyl, CD, etc. Here's another flow chart. So here's some crucial mastering techniques. Multiband compressors, so compressors that are tuned to different frequency ranges, limiters, reverbs, sample rate conversion and dithering. And then here are some crucial things about mastering: creating Redbook CD, which is a certain kind of format that's for mastering albums, and creating an MP3, which is optional. You can see this is from 2011. It's 10 years old, so but it's still basically true. So one thing that I think Israel referred to, which is having your track and then having it work on multiple formats. So these are a bunch of formats that you want your one mix to sound good for all of these things. Or you make multiple mixes. So you have a mix for iTunes, you have a mix for YouTube, you have a mix for Spotify, you have a mix for a CD, etc. So Bob Katz wrote the book on mastering. I recommend you get this book. It's great, and he's mastered. Yeah, he's like one of the most famous mastering engineers ever, and he's mastered a lot of really important albums. And also, Sound on Sound has a whole series on mastering, which you can see like what do mastering engineers actually do, and then like reviews of material, and a bunch of content. So there's a lot of really great free content online, as well as through that Bob Katz book. So one reason that mastering is so important is back in the day, with EMI Records, the Beatles drove their record producers crazy because they would want the bass to be so loud in their recordings that it would physically cause the needle to jump off of the record whenever whenever it got printed. So this happened on an album, and EMI like freaked out because like how can you distribute an album that like screws up the very medium that you're trying to listen to it on, right? Like the bass is too loud. So ever since then, EMI didn't let the Beatles do their own mastering. They always had an outside mastering engineer to make sure everything was good before it got sent out. Pretty hilarious. So mastering, there's different formats of masters. Like there are master tapes. So this is a master tape, reel to reel for Creedence Clearwater Revival album Bayou Country from 1968. And it is a physical object, right? So like these days, whenever you have a master, you're probably not going to have a master that's a tape. You might have a master that's a CD or that are digital files. So a glass master is a physical glass CD that's made that for whenever you're producing thousands of albums, you want to have a glass master that then they duplicate. So they don't just like burn a CD. Instead, they recreate, they duplicate a physical glass master CD. And the glass master has special technique of how it's made using lasers, which is cool. I'm always like lasers, using lasers cutting the digital data into the polyurethane and then being metallicized with glass. So here's how data gets read and written from CDs. So here are some big points about what mastering engineers do and what you should be concerned about if you need to get something mastered, if you're trying to master it yourself. I definitely recommend that you pay people to master your work rather than trying to do it yourself. But if you're in a corner or you can't afford it, then here are the things that you need to know. So first of all, the space that you listen to your tracks in for mastering, the final check, the space should be acoustically balanced, acoustically tuned, using all kinds of bass traps, soundproofing material, so that there are no frequencies that resonate the room. So like if you're in so the room that I'm in right now at home is a square. So if I measure the length of the walls, the width and then the height, I can calculate which frequencies physically resonate this room. And those frequencies will actually be boosted in whatever I'm listening to because of the room that I'm in. So this room is not good for mastering because it's not acoustically treated and it's a square. You don't want a square room. You'll notice that a lot of mastering studios, a lot of recording studios have weird shapes of rooms, like kind of oblong and stuff like that. That's to prevent room modes from happening. Another thing with mastering is how you listen. So you want to have multiple sets of speakers. This is something that we do have in the studio that I also think is important for mixing. Oh yeah, that looks amazing. I want to go to there. So here's just a bunch of photos of mastering studios. Usually they have these big monitors that are built in, so FAR monitors, and then they have near field monitors for listening for detail, and then headphones for listening to ultra detail. And in a mastering studio, you want everything to be tuned so that you can completely trust the system you're listening on to not boost anything or cut any frequencies that you don't want. Another aspect of mastering is sequencing. So you're setting up the timings of an album, the spacing, the fades, where tracks start, etc. So here's some different views. And you can create what's called a cue sheet. Actually, is it cue sheet? Or what's it called? It's yeah, PQ sheet, or a track list. And what that is it contains the metadata about who the artist is, the title tracks, etc., the exact length of tracks in seconds and milliseconds, and then the position for playthrough and the total length. So this is information that a CD distributor will take in and they'll put it into the CDs themselves. So of the masters that I've done, here's a PQ sheet for, I think this is a solo piano album. No, this is a piano and cello album. And you can see there are durations, ISRC codes, which are specific codes that are made for every track that are unique to each CD that it's just like a standard that's used internationally. Then you have the titles, composers, track numbers, index numbers, total time. So all of that information is made in mastering software. The mastering software that I have is called HOFA. Here's a different mastering session. And so this is an old session. I moved all my files around, so it's not finding my WAV files down here. That's why it has all this red stuff. But you can still see all of the information here about the track names, and then all the durations and all the fades between things and everything. So if I pull that up here, so it kind of works like a DAW, but it's just more specific. So here, the space between the start of the track, there's a little bit of space there. And then let me zoom out. So like the space between, there is zero space, zero fade between tracks 3 and tracks 4, for example. So you can set all of that up in mastering software. Here's another, Sonorous is another mastering software. So by the way, before I move on, do you guys have any questions about the mastering software before I just like keep talking about other stuff? The software that we have in the studio, or that you have on your computer, does not do mastering. It's actually like a separate piece of software. So like Pro Tools, Logic, Adobe Audition, etc., none of them do mastering. You can use mastering techniques in those softwares, but they're not for mastering. Is this software available on all computers? Yeah, so there's different kinds of software. If we just Google it, let's see. So Ozone by iZotope, which is a great one. I'm not sure what its so they're definitely plugins, but basically there's different softwares for Mac and for PC and Linux and everything. There's no one mastering software that's like the best. So you can't really go that wrong. So the way that you EQ in mastering is different than how you EQ for mixing, because you're changing the frequency balance for the whole album, or like for a whole song. So it's like you're mixing on a bigger level, on like a macro level. So on your system that's tuned and balanced, you can make small tweaks to like, oh, this the frequency 112 hertz is typically slightly hotter. Like there's a little bump at 112 hertz throughout the whole album. So you might do just a little bit of a cut by like 2 dB on 112 hertz to like even that out slightly. So it's like, it's that precise. And it's only after very detailed frequency analysis. And now hopefully this like sparks your thinking about why I have you guys do those frequency analysis things, and why I have you listen in such a detailed way. Mastering uses these techniques to ensure quality in sounds. There's also global EQ, like using the smile EQ. So taking down the mids and boosting the lows and the highs is like a typical thing that can be done in the mastering. And really, you want the mastering engineer to be a different person than the mixing engineer. So you have a different set of ears, and you have somebody who can correct things that the mixing engineer does badly. So I like mixing. I'm a mixing engineer, and it's always a big compliment to me whenever a mastering engineer says like, oh, hey, yeah, your mixers are always really great. They're really easy to work with. That's good. That means they're not having to like go over a bunch of work that I did again. Like, oh, they missed all of this stuff. Oh, this EQ sounds funky, you know. Yep, you are very familiar with these. Here's some gear. So one thing about mastering is, to be a mastering engineer and really do it right, you need to have a bunch of expensive analog equipment. And there are certain reasons for that. It's because the equipment will, there are certain standards like to ensure quality. And the high-end analog equipment is basically ensures the absolute best quality. Pretty much. I mean, it is subject to debate, but it's been done this way for a long time. Another issue is loudness. So what's the overall dynamic range? And one important thing that that mastering measures in is dBFS, or decibels full scale, otherwise known as loudness units full scale. So if I pull up Audition and I open one of your tracks, one reason that I have you do amplitude analysis is that you can look at it from a mastering standpoint. What is the overall loudness level? So let me pull up, here's Israel's project. So right down here, I'm doing amplitude statistics. Let me scan. So in amplitude statistics, we have a bunch of information. So first of all, like, does it clip? You know what I mean? Peak amplitude. So it doesn't clip by 0.1 decibels. So definitely there's some kind of limiter or something right there, right? And it's the same in left and right. True peak amplitude. So TP, dBTP is another measurement. And actually I can click right here and it shows me where those points are. Sample values, possibly clip samples. Okay, so RMS amplitude. So RMS is a way of measuring a signal over time called root mean square. So it's a specific mathematical way of measuring. And so the RMS amplitude averages are around -14. So that's one way a mastering engineer will look at the loudness level of a track, is what's the RMS average, root mean square average. Another way, so if you look down here, this says ITU, ITU-RBS loudness. So this is a loudness unit that's used internationally as a way to understand amplitude levels and dynamic ranges. And the loudness, LUFS, loudness units full scale, is at -10.4, which is, so what that means is this track is mastered pretty loudly. like a normal LUFS level is around minus 15 LUFS. So this is mastered really hot. And you can see that here too, right? Like just looking at the waveform, it looks like it has a really strong signal, like it's compressed and it's intense. And that number says the same thing. So the digital scale is dB full scale, by the way. Any questions about those different units really quick before I move on? So we have the true peak amplitude, which is what we talk about all the time, just like dB, just decibels. We have decibels analyzed through RMS, and then we have decibels analyzed for loudness units full scale. So 3 different ways of measuring.
Can you talk about the RMS amplitude again? I don't quite understand.
Yeah, so I think maybe if I pull up an example. So it's the square root of the average of the squares of a series of measurements. So it's a mathematical formula. The square root of the mean square. So the quadratic mean. So this is just a specific, oh yeah, here we go. Boom, there it is, root mean square. So it's just a particular way of measuring waveforms that's standardized in engineering. And basically it kind of averages things together in a certain way. You don't need to understand, the math or like remember the algorithm or anything, but just know it's like one way of calculating an average. Whereas loudness units full scale is a different way of calculating that same average. Like you can see here, RMS average is minus 14 and our ITBU is minus 10. So they're different by 4 decibels. And that's just because they calculate it differently. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, and like I said, you don't need to memorize like the actual math of it unless you want to build your own RMS analyzer, which sounds awesome. You should do it. Okay, so loudness, different techniques. Parallel compression. This is a technique where you take a bounce and then you compress that bounce, like you compress the whole thing just through the master, and then you add it back into itself. So like you're doing a wet dry mix over the whole master with compression. Multiband compression, we've talked about before. Limiting, you've used before. And normalization is just boosting all the signal up until it reaches 0 dB SPL. 0 dB. Okay, so there are different formats for mastering CDs. So these formats were invented whenever the CD was invented, pretty much whenever manufacturers are trying to figure out like, okay, how much data can we fit onto this one disc? And like how much time can we fit on a single CD? And what are all the rules, the standards we need so that we can use CDs all across the world and have them work? And the CDs actually, think about it, the CD is pretty great in this way. Like you can get a CD anywhere in the world and listen to it on any CD player. It works. That's not always true of like videos. Like if you have PAL and NTSC, right? So like if I buy a Blu-ray in China and try to watch it on my Blu-ray player here, it won't necessarily work. But with CDs, it does work. And one of those reasons are these formats. And the most important format is Redbook, digital CD-DA with extended CD text. And so here are the rules of Redbook format. You have to have one start track and one end track. Tracks must be longer than 4 seconds. The entire disc can't be longer than 74 minutes. That's the cutoff. And very arbitrarily, they just picked this famous recording of Herbert von Karajan and the Berlin Philharmonic. And they were like, okay, this recording is 650 megabytes. So that's the standard now. They just kind of chose it. It's goofy. maximum number of tracks, 99. And then you can't partition a volume. Like, you know how with hard drives, you can partition it. They ruled that like for this digital storage device of a CD, you can't do that. You can't partition it. So pretty much all major manufactured CDs, like every CD that you've listened to that you bought that was like a professionally made CD is in Redbook standard, which by the way, just curious, how many of y'all have bought a CD in your life? Right in. Okay. Okay. Still doing it. That's great.
Yeah, I have a vinyl and CD collection too.
Yeah, I mean, I do too. Mine's part of mine is back here. Okay, all right. So it's not completely dead yet. Yeah, I really think, you know, CDs do actually sound better than streaming audio. Like the sample rate, the bit rate, and the stream rate are better than any streaming audio, basically, except for some very select ones. So a CD is kind of like guaranteed quality. And yeah, as Megan says, no need for an internet connection. So there are some things that CDs do that are streaming hasn't beat yet. Also, I like the physical aspect of having a CD. So Redbook, it's uniform. It's used for commercial duration releases. So one package of creating a CD is called a DDP file, which is short for Disk Description Protocol. And this is the type of file that you send to a manufacturer. And DDP has a bunch of stuff in it. It has audio files, has metadata, text files, etc. And the metadata are things like the ISBN. No, not ISBN. That's for books. Let's look at one. Okay. So here is a DDP image that I made of a CD. So it has a CD text.bin file, a DDP ID file, an image.dat, a digital audio tape, probably a digital audio transmission. And this is what this format is what actually contains the audio files. So they're written as one unit, not as like separate AIF files or whatever, but as a separate file type. Check something, the PQ sheet, track list, and some other stuff. So this whole like collection of file formats together is a DDP master. Also, like if you're working with a record company, usually they'll send you something like this, or their technical person will let you know what they want. This record company is called Delos, and they're pretty old school. So they wanted some old school stuff. So they wanted a DDP, which I just showed you. And they also want audio files in various formats. So they want standard CD format, so 44.1 sample rate, 16-bit. They want the same thing in FLAC or FLAC. They want mastered for iTunes audio files, which by the way, mastered for iTunes is a whole racket, but basically it's just a higher sample rate and bitrate files, and then higher sample rate and bitrate FLAC. In addition, they gave you the mastering number, and then there's a checklist full of stuff. So there are basically standards that are adhered to in the audio industry. Yeah, so the DAT image is an audio image file, so like a software installer on a Mac, or like a physical disk. Oh, here's some mastering softwares. Oh yeah, so Hofa, that one I use, is for PC and Mac.
You can master in Reaper?
I mean, You can do basically anything with Reaper. That doesn't mean it's going to be the best thing ever. I don't know if Reaper can make DDP files. That's a question. All right, there you go. You can make DDP files with Reaper. So if you can make DDP files, then technically it's mastering software. Yeah. So you're in mastering software, you're prepping the file. Don't delete your mixes or your master files so you don't lose anything. You're the final person who's creating fades, who's creating space between tracks. So here are some myths about mastering. So these are things that you'll hear people say when you're working in audio, working in music, that I want to dispute. So one thing is that one thing that people will say is like, oh, we'll fix it in mastering. Like, yeah, this thing isn't really working, but we'll fix it in post. It's like that, but like, yeah, this thing in the mix isn't working, but the mastering engineer will fix it. No, no, no. There's no magic formula. There's no pixie dust that's going to like make your snare not sound like shit. You know what I mean? Like, they're using the techniques that we just talked about, right? They're using analog equipment. That stuff can only take in audio, take in information, and then put it out. It can't work miracles. It can't cure cancer. You know what I mean? So this is why we start with the recording stage and with the listening and with the listening through microphone stage, because you really want to get it right at first. One thing is that you already do use mastering techniques. Like the fact that you're using compression at all means that you're starting to use mastering techniques. The fact that you use limiting at all, you're using a mastering technique. One thing is that you may think like, oh, I need to master this track before I send it out to SoundCloud or whatever. Not really. Not really. Like you can send it through a multiband compressor, your track, before you put it online, but like, I don't know. What kind of value does that add in your life? Like to like, does using a multiband compressor just make you feel better about yourself? I wonder sometimes. And one thing is that people will often think that they're a mastering engineer when they're not, because you have to have a tuned room. You have to have a space totally set up. You need to have the right equipment to really do it right. So like I showed you some mastering stuff that I did. I only did it because like under duress, like under protest, like I really do not want to master this album. You should really pay this professional engineer. But in this specific case, I will like make an exception and I will make a master of this for you because I'm a mixing engineer. It's a different thing. Yep, I just said that. Oh yeah, so here's my buddy, Dan. So let's take a look at his mastering stuff. Whoop. You've migrated his web page. Yeah, okay. So this is his page, Little Castle Mastering, Dan Eaton. We went to CalArts together. So you can see his portfolio. Oh, cool. I guess he was on Song Exploder on Netflix. Didn't know that. So some short films. He's also a sound designer. Yeah, and if we look at his site that's actually about mastering, there we go. So he has description of what he does. Let's look at his equipment. Oh yeah. Oh baby. So so one thing that mastering engineers will have is the converters, the digital to analog converters that they have will be super high quality so that they can ensure the highest integrity of audio quality. So like, let's look up the Bricasti M3 HD AC. Yeah. So this one piece of gear is like 5K. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we could keep looking up more equipment, but basically, mastering engineers collect all of this gear to create a workflow to get the best possible guarantee of quality. So if you're not Dan Eaton and you haven't built your own business being a mastering engineer, here's what you can do. So listen to a whole collection of things all together and compare the dynamics, the color of the tracks, etc. And you can use Audition to do a lot of this stuff and get a really good idea. Try to match the quality, the tone of your different tracks just using filtering and compression. Decide on the space between tracks, put in fades, etc. And then listen to the whole thing to make sure that there's no errors after you bounce out the final versions. So for your master tracks, you definitely want to listen to the quality, and then also make sure about the codec and encoding format, sample rate, etc. So like if you are making something to put up on iTunes, then you need to look at, you're probably using some distribution service like CD Baby. So if you use a service like CD Baby to sell your music on iTunes, then there are certain specs that they ask for. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find the specs right away, but yeah. Yeah, so you have to get into the guts a little bit to find the specs that they want. But basically, they'll want a specific file format, sample rate, bit rate, and potentially different codecs like FLAC as opposed to AIF or WAV, etc. Yeah, so that's my quick and dirty overview on mastering. And I didn't need to stop sharing. That's full. That's fine, actually. I meant to stop recording. Am I still recording?